I think it would be very, very fascinating to start by asking you about how it all came about that you were actually cast in The Golden Apple, because what's very interesting about this sort of landmark, really, in the history of American music and theatre is that John Latouche and Jerome Moross, between them, created something with basically new artists who, a lot of these artists, such as yourself, you were, of course, already known, but this was a watershed, and you were to become extremely famous after this event particularly. So it'd be very interesting to hear actually how the auditions took place and how they found you.
Well, it's very interesting because John Latouche first found me, and I did 7 auditions for this. And the 7th one was the one of victory, but I heard it at I heard of what do I say? A reading, musically, at his apartment. And I knew when I heard Lazy Afternoon that I had to sing that song. It was so incredibly beautiful, but the entire score was so magnificent. It was a real opera, you know. It was never spoken word. Before Les Mis, before many other things, it was the first, and it won every award imaginable. But it wasn't a commercial success. It was a great, great artistic success. And after that, it's astounding to me that someone hasn't reproduced it, because it is so today. Everything about it is right for today. It was ahead of its time.
Yes, it's fascinating what you say there. Lots of things that come out of this just opening that you've given us, because from the very word go, from when you hear the overture at the very beginning, this is so absolutely typical of what so many of Moross's works begin with. It's a kind of combination of something very jubilant, but also something very, when I say nervous, I mean nervous in a very positive sense. It's highly, highly rhythmic. It's very colourful. The orchestration is so individualistic, and it immediately grabs you. But I want to just ask you, even before we go further than that, it's very interesting how you immediately, when you heard Lazy Afternoon, felt you had to sing that. Now, I ask you not to be too embarrassed by what I say, but I am speaking what many people feel. Now, it's been recorded, do you know, I think 163 times, at least, actually, more, but those are the amount I've counted. But always we come back to your original 1954 recording, because nobody else has quite captured, and this is the word I'd like to use. It's so beautiful, there is almost a pathos. It brings tears to my eyes when I hear you perform this, because you get the feeling that this lady, Helen, is more than just a seductress. She's longing for a release from the boredom of her everyday life. And I think you bring a beauty and a magic which is quite overwhelming in that song, and I really find it very wonderful.
How could I just stand here and listen? I'm going to leave you in my will. I mean, it is a difficult song, and they think of it as just a regular, pop song. It's not that. Jerome Moross and John Latouche honored me by saying no one will sing it as well as I do. And it's because I took the chance of, it's a lazy afternoon, just very seductive but yet sad. And they loved it, that I captured what they had intended to be captured. And I loved particularly a fat pink cloud hangs over the hill, unfolding like a rose. If you hold my hand and sit real still, you can hear the grass as it grows. I mean, that was so incredibly beautiful that I said, I have to sing that song. And I did. And Brooks Atkinson, who was the critic of the day, said, a triumph. And the interesting thing, John, it never got a hand. It got from the entire audience, they'd go, oh. It was so, I don't know how to explain it. It was just wonderful. But when you think of the lyrics in that show, Good is a word that fools believe. Evil is a word that the wise achieve. Fools who are good fools try to deny that evil exists. They pass it by. Life without evil is empty and strange. Without evil, how can the world ever change? You know, it's just absolutely wonderful. I mean, it was poetry, and musically, it was a perfect marriage of music and lyric.
But you see, only when you hear it, I have to say that of all the people I've heard do this, I don't know anybody else who has captured this mélange, this subtle mixture of seduction and sadness. I'd like to just stay with this for a minute, if I may, because I think it's very central to the whole of the piece and to Jerome Moross. You know, in the tradition of great operas and great operettas, let us look at, for instance, Donizetti and, for instance, Offenbach. Now, in these great works that on the surface appear to be comic and are in many ways satirical and amusing in a sort of quite charming way, but always those works underneath have great sadness, and the ability to capture the sadness without making it too, how can we say, center stage, but to have that sadness in such a way that it moves you. That is, I think, what makes this very special.
You certainly have captured Jerome Moross, and I'm glad you're making people aware of him, because he deserves all the credit in everything he ever wrote. I mean, ballet ballads, or just everything. He was the most sensitive man, and he had a sadness about him that was just so, well, I just loved him. And John Latouche, let's not forget him. He's just a great lyricist, but more of a poet than a lyricist. You know, it's the going home together when the day is done. It's the me that's you. I mean, he's just magnificent, really. And I'm glad that you're making people aware of the Golden Apple, because it does belong as a classic. And I feel that opera companies should, revise this. And it should be, well, anyway, you know how I feel.
I'm very interested in what you said about him being a shy man, because I don't think he ever advertised himself. He should be
never. He didn't like publicity. He was so humble, and he had such a great talent.
Well, we could talk for hours about this, but you mentioned ballet ballads. Now, if you look at that, and you have a look also at Frankie and Johnny, and you have a look also at the Golden Apple, in all these cases, it's full of surprises. It's inventive, it's colourful, it's full of unusual things, but what is most interesting to me is that each piece he wrote, and you can even find this in all the films, they are all utterly different. You straight away, you know it's Moross, but he responded, didn't he, to the situations, the words, and the characters that were in front of him, and he didn't write formula music. He wrote music out of how he responded, didn't he?
That's exactly it. In ballet ballads, there's one melody that just haunted me. It was da 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 da. Yellow Flower. Do you know that song? that melody? Do 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 do. That's gorgeous, gorgeous. Or another one was, he brought me windflowers. Well, he was a beautiful man, just a beautiful soul, a beautiful mind, and really an accomplished, composer. That's it. I can only sum it up that way.
I think we should also acknowledge, don't you, that he was very innovative and very radical. It's very interesting if you look at the influences and what his interests were. He was so eclectic. He was fascinated. in his young years by Charles Ives and by Schoenberg and by a lot of the more unusual composers who in those days very few people were interested in. And at the same time, he had this natural melodic gift, which I think came from his background and from his great understanding of traditional classical music. He believed himself to be, first and foremost, a classical composer.
Have you heard his unpublished work that I think is called Underworld? And it's just completely different. And, he's amazing. I just hope you can turn the world on to recognizing more of Jerome Moross, because he deserves it.
Well, the best possible way of starting this off is with yourself. You are our most specially valued person. We've got a very large selection of people contributing to this programme, I can tell you, more than 12, in fact. But to begin with you, as I say, this legendary person in your own time, is wonderful. And just to go back, if I may, again, to that wonderful recording. Incidentally, of course, the recording which we're playing was done in the studios, and the studio recording, of course, wasn't complete. It was only about half the amount.
You know, that makes me so sad, because they just recorded half, and people didn't really get the full value of what it is. The opening, nothing ever happens in Angels Roost. I mean, it's just so great, and they didn't have time. At that time, it was on vinyl, so they did 33 1/3, and it's just, they didn't have the time or the money. It's very sad. That's why I want it reproduced. I just think it should be. It just should be. And I don't know if they'll get around to it, but you're doing everything in your power to make it happen.
It's interesting, isn't it, Kaye, that he did do, as you've described to us earlier, work that had no dialogue in. Now, that was very daring for an off-Broadway, or for that matter, an on-Broadway piece, wasn't it?
Yes, it was very unusual. And you know, this is interesting. He rehearsed us for 3 weeks. We did 3 performances. The preview, the second preview, and the third was the opening. None of this fooling around for 8 months to try something out, and 10 months, and it's just become ridiculous now. Just to try something out takes millions. It's silly. Well,
interesting that you just mentioned there that he was rehearsing you. He was present at the rehearsals.
Oh, absolutely. He just loved it. He just got great joy out of playing it and making you understand it. But the tragedy is he always had a cigarette dangling from his mouth, and that's what killed him eventually. He died at a very early age, and he had so much more to give.
Well, that's absolutely marvellous. Well, thank you very, very much. Kaye, is there anything else you'd like to add? Because I've only sort of asked you a few things, really, but what you've said has been extremely forthcoming and very full. But if there's anything that I've left out...
No, I just said it all when I said I've said it all in this interview. I can't think of anything more that I could say about a man that was so great. And I wish you all the best. And I want them to reproduce the Golden Apple. They'll really hear some brilliant, brilliant lyrics and music.
Well, Kaye Ballard, it's really a tremendous experience to speak with you, and we must thank the WFMT radio network in Chicago for...
Yay!
Yes, and also Susanna.
Well, Susanna has kept up with me, and she's... Well, I just love that his daughter appreciated him as much as we do that understand. She won't give up. She wants this done, and she is right. He should be recognized for what he has done, what he was. And I'm going to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'm going to try to talk that opera into producing the Golden Apple, because it would be so successful because it reigns with the classics, really. It's that good. And it was the first show that was done with just silk screens. It was so inventive in every single way.
Kaye, it's been fantastic talking with you. Thank you very, very much indeed. I wish you very, very best, and I hope I meet up with you before too long. Thank you so much. Good night for now, and thank you.
Thank you so much.